Yes, it is. I mean, first of all, one has to define what a storage tank is, because at the time of the incident in which three reactors had a meltdown situation, of course, many of the storage tanks and storage facilities were improvised. In fact, they used the reactor containment as a storage facility for water. They encapsulated the fuel cores in water. And of course, that's what's happening is the intensely radioactive fuel is beginning to migrate into the water, and the water is seeping and migrating out of the containment. This plant was not only subject to a nuclear incident following a tsunami, but also, of course, it's reckoned that it suffered quite severe earthquake damage as well.
So this contaminated water is in the ecosystem, effectively. That's got to have serious consequences, doesn't it?
In the immediate ecosystem, and of course it moves beyond that. Once it comes out of the groundwater into the marine environment, then tides and currents will take it along. And the sort of scenario is rather like this, that you get these very fine oxide particles of fuel, each intensely radioactive, being carried along the coastline, the tide taking it in, so you get the intertidal debris. You know, we've all walked along beaches where there's plastic cups and shopping bags, etc., just spread around. That intertidal debris is radioactive. It dries out. The onshore breeze that comes every day blows the radioactive dust, these very fine particles, onto local communities, and those communities receive an exceptional dose. I mean, the level of the contaminated water has been described as something like 100 millisieverts, 100 units of radiation per hour. Well, actually, in Europe, in Britain in particular, to get the emergency dose of 5 millisieverts, that would take about 3 minutes of exposure. So that puts it into context. It's pretty active, pretty intense, and it's out of control.
The operator, Tokyo Electric Power, known as TEPCO, was criticised for shortcomings ahead of the Fukushima nuclear plant disaster back in 2011, which you mentioned, which followed an earthquake and a tsunami. Has it done enough since then? And are there shortcomings in general in the Japanese nuclear energy sector?
I would say very certainly TEPCO has lost my confidence, if not most of the nuclear community's confidence, in its ability, and also this scorn, if you like, for this lack of expertise, lack of clear management and action, also applies to the old regulator, the Japanese regulator NISA, which was virtually disbanded after the Fukushima accident. The problem is this: TEPCO has really reacted on the hoof, so to speak. It's simply not planned what the longer-term effects and consequences are of the expedient actions that it took way back in 2011. And what we're seeing today with this leak is a consequence of not thinking through the immediate containment actions, flooding the reactors, for example, that they took way back in May and June of 2011. And that's the real problem. They didn't think ahead. And, of course, they're left with an inaddressable situation where there's not much you can do once this radiation gets out to the marine environment.
Can I just finally ask you, do you anticipate some kind of international response to this? Clearly, the international community all have a vested interest in ensuring that the waters around them aren't contaminated. What can the international community do?
Well, the first thing to do will be a sort of paperwork exercise where the International Atomic Energy Agency will effectively redress the accident classification of 1, the least accident that TEPCO have actually put on this particular plant. I would say this is going to be an accident level 5 release. And then the local community and the international communities need to look at what sort of controls you put over the marine fish stocks that are taken in those waters. So it looks like we're in for a long term here. Remember, 3 reactors went down. Each reactor had about 120, 130 tons of fuel. That's lacking any containment. It's beginning to drift into the marine and terrestrial environments. The situation is that the radiation and the radiological effect in terms of health harm for that fuel will go on for hundreds, thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. So this really does need addressing rapidly to stop that long-term consequence occurring.